Hello everyone. So this video is going to be kind of a similar ordeal to what I did in my Steel Series Ikari video. Basically, disassemble a mouse and kind of show you what goes on the inside, show you what everything is, and that way if you have an issue, you can kind of self-diagnose without needing to go out and buy a new mouse or dig a lot online to try to figure out what the issue is exactly. So this video is going to focus on the Logitech G400 family of mice. So that includes the MX500, MX510, MX518, G400, G400S. I have in front of me, this is a G400S, so you can see both these are the same shell, but this guy has like some marks on it. This is a G400, and then this is actually, the insides are a G400, but the shell is an MX510 in red. It also came in blue. The MX518 I don't have with me right now, but it's like a steel hammered gray look to it. They're all basically identical in terms of shell. The only thing that really changes are some of the internal components. So we'll go ahead and disassemble my custom. This is just to kind of show you guys. This is my custom G400 that I've done a few things to. And yeah, we'll just start out with this. So to begin, you need to flip it over and remove 3 screws from the bottom. There's 1 in the middle in the back foot and then 2 at the top. So the only tool you'll need for this is a small screwdriver. I use one that has a flathead and a Phillips head bit on it. So down here on the bottom, you can see there's a little notch. That there and here are where you're going to want to slide your screwdriver underneath to pry up. Now you do want to be careful. You can see on this one I kind of messed up and I used my fingernail and I actually separated the Teflon foot a little bit from the adhesive. So this won't stick back down. So you do want to be careful and make sure that you definitely have the screwdriver under there completely before you start prying upward. And then just kind of slowly peel it off. You can remove it completely. If you remove it completely, I suggest sticking it down to a plasticky or some kind of smooth, flat surface. That way you don't bend these feet too much, because if you bend them too much, they'll get disformed. So you have your 2 screws here and here. I actually already have this one removed. I like to only keep this one in. That way I'm not bending the foot back too much whenever I'm disassembling this, because I've taken apart this mouse a few times now. And then I'm just going to stick the foot back down to keep it flat. Same thing goes for the other side. So there's that 1 screw in there. And all the 3 screws on the bottom are the same thread and the same size, so don't worry about which hole they go into. They can be put interchangeably anywhere. So now to separate the shell, you want to go between the seam of the top and the lower shell. I personally find it's easiest just kind of pull on the tip of the cord here and then pull straight off and watch for any pieces to fall out. We just want to be careful of that. Okay. Now, since this is kind of a general mouse guide, I'll also say that a lot of mice that have the single screw in the back, they'll usually have a clasp mechanism towards the front. So here's like a standard HP office mouse, and there's a just single screw in the back, and you can see I can't pull it apart. You'll actually need to slide the top back and the bottom part forward. So if I just kind of wiggle and do that, you can see there are the 4 prongs here, 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 and here. And those are what mesh together. And a lot of mouse shells have that kind of design. G400 doesn't happen to have that though. Okay, so now that you have this apart, you do want to watch out. Sometimes your scroll wheel, there's a little spring that looks like that. And that will sometimes want to fall off. So be mindful of that. You do need that. And then you also want to be mindful because of this cable right here that connects the top to the lower half. So to go ahead and remove the 2 top and bottom halves from each other, we will grab onto this housing here, and we're going to pull it up and wiggle. And we don't want to pull on the cables. We want to pull on the plastic connector because we don't want to disconnect any of the cables from the socket. Give it a bit of a wiggle and tug. Okay. So now I'll give you guys a shot at the bottom half. So I'll just go over what everything is in here. You have your left mouse, your right mouse, your middle mouse click is under here, under this sliding sled thing that the scroll wheel sits in. Obviously your scroll wheel. You have this gray box underneath this bracket is the sensor. Microprocessor, this is the cable and connector for USB. And then you have the red LED light underneath this black housing. And then underneath that, you can kind of see, whoops, you can kind of see a little bit of the clear in here, and that is the lens. So those are the main parts you need to worry about with your mouse. So I guess we'll go ahead and remove the scroll wheel. So the scroll wheel just sits inside of this little sled here. This is a Logitech design. A lot of Logitech mice have this kind of floating scroll wheel design. Otherwise, the most common design is an encoder. So here's a SteelSeries Ikari optical, and the encoder is just, if I pull the wheel out here, you can see it's marked on the top of the PCB there. If my camera focuses, encoder. And that's this little silver thing that the wheel sits inside of. And so how this works is there's a little bit of just feedback when you spin it. There's you probably can't hear it on the camera, but there's a quiet spinning sound. And then you can see the axle of the wheel sits on top of a red micro switch right there. That's the most common design. Logitech's design is a little bit more robust. So by it sitting inside of this sled here, you can re-grease this sled over time as it gets more worn out. You have this side spring on here that you don't want to lose. This basically just helps it return to the original resting position. And then you can also see the pinwheel design of the wheel, all those little grooves in the wheel. That's actually because instead of using an encoder to process mouse wheel changes, there's a photo gate. So basically a laser beam, think of it that way, goes from here to here. One's the sender, one's the receiver, and it counts those little spokes being spun. So if you're having a mouse wheel problem with your Logitech mouse, maybe make sure that your photo gate's looking okay and that the mouse wheel, scroll wheel is still intact and everything. So now taking this apart, the wheel just kind of slides right off. So this is a red wheel that I actually got from a Lenovo mouse. I love that red scroll wheel. I kind of like being a little bit different like that. I think it's cool. And then we also have inside of this black sled, we have this spring. So this spring hooks into the bottom. There's a hole down here by my middle finger. And the square part hook, whoops, goes into that hole, and then the loop hook part goes up into this groove that has grease inside of it. So you can see I have some grease in my fingers from that. Yep, so it should sit inside of it like that. And so what happens is if you look at the inside of the scroll wheel, you'll see there's notches on the inside of the scroll wheel, and that way that metal spring is actually in contact with those as you turn it. So I know some people who like a softer scroll wheel, they'll bend this metal spring so that it's not rubbing against the inside of the scroll wheel so much, and that'll give you a smooth, less resistant scroll. So to put it back into the sled, you just slide it into there, and then you want to make sure that you have the spring on the other side. And the spring, the loop-de-loop goes around the axle, and then the two legs of it go into the two black posts. Okay, so you can see another modification I've done here. I have an Omron D2FC-F-7N, or the white one right here. That's right mouse. And then left mouse, I have my own that I soldered in. So this is a D2F-01 F, which is my favorite switch. So moving on, we can go ahead and take out the PCB. PCB stands for printed circuit board. It's just this green and ugly orangish thing down here. So we'll have 3 screws. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we take off the bracket here, we'll actually get a better view at the sensor, and you'll be able to see on the top of the sensor are some letters and numbers. The first set of letters and numbers is probably the sensor model number, and that's the important one. And then below that is going to be usually a manufacturing date, or sometimes like a revision level. So I'll give you guys a shot of that. At the top there you see S3095, that's the sensor, and then the rest of this is just, I don't know what it is, but it's probably only really has significance to like internal engineering teams at Logitech. So now that those 4 screws are out, you can just lift the PCB directly out, just straight up. You'll want to be careful. I guess we can take the scroll wheel out too. There we go. And so we'll see, my lens is actually broken. Wow, that is weird. Okay, that's fascinating. Okay, well, moving on. So we have the USB cable here, so it's the same ordeal. You'll want to grab it by the housing, not by the wires. Wiggle a little bit and gently remove it. There we go. And then down here, wow, this is actually really weird. I have a broken lens. I don't think it will affect much because it looks like all the crucial pieces are still intact. But you can see down here, those 2 pieces are supposed to go together. So I do not know how that broke. It's a fairly clean cut break. Because obviously when I was drilling all this and whatnot, I did not have any of the internal parts in here. This was all, yeah, I don't know how that happened, but okay. So I should be okay anyway. So now that you have this taken apart, you can, put some compressed air on it. Note that there is going to be a little bit of grease inside of these 2 prongs here because that's where the sled for the scroll wheel slides up and down, and so you can kind of see those have a little bit of gunk in them right now, and I'm going to leave that there. Okay, so then also you'll want to make sure that you don't touch that little hole at the top of the sensor there. Just leave that be. Don't really need to mess up your mouse for no reason. Now we'll go ahead and move on to, one more thing about, so the cable, so a pretty common issue with a lot of the G400 series family of Logitech mice is the cable failing over time. So this cable is actually a pretty standard mouse cable. I bought a G400 from eBay that had, the guy was saying it was having intermittent issues, like it was making the unplug replug sound all the time in Windows. And so I was like, okay, it's obviously a cable problem. That's no big deal because as you can see, here's the G400 cable on the right, on your right, and then here's just a cheap cable I got from a mouse at Salvation Army on your left. You can see they're the same exact thing. As long as those colors match up, which they do for me, black, black, red, white, green, with the furthest most black being ground. That's just a simple, plug it in like that, and then you're good to go. Fixed your mouse. There are replacement, if you're kind of afraid of, substituting in a different cable, you can get replacement cables for around $5. Okay, now we'll move on to the top shell. So the upper shell has your side button clicks and then the arm that's on. So to take that apart, this is actually going to look a little bit different from what you guys are used to. I cut out a lot of this here to reduce weight, and then ironically I messed up. I accidentally cut out the pivot for the side button, so I had to hot glue that back on, but whatever, it works. So there's some screws you'll take out from there. Basically take out every single screw. As far as the side buttons go, you can take off the 2 screws nearest to that center piece. Okay. So then here's the PCB that comes with your side buttons. So if one of those aren't clicking anymore, you can replace those. Here you have just some standard little push buttons, and these correspond to the 3 small little dip buttons that are on the top. So I guess going back really quick to the bottom PCB, if you have a mouse click that is no longer working, you can actually see there are 3 prongs. 1, 2, 3. And you can just, what I would do is I would just take a picture of the PCB before you do any soldering and everything, and then, you know, unsolder the switch that you want to remove, and then pull it out, then put in the new one and then solder it back in. So you can see here I soldered in my own switch. That's why it looks so ugly at the top there. Yeah, so recommended is a leaded solder. I was using a different solder, and it kind of has a pretty high melting temperature, which is bad for electronics. You don't want to put too much heat on the PCB because it can make some of the electrical traces separate from the PCB, which is bad. So a leaded solder, and probably around 400, 500-ish degrees on the iron. Usually solder melts around 400 or high 300s. So moving on, back to this. So there's a couple more screws to remove. So if we remove the rest in here, and these should all be identical as well, so you don't have to worry too much about making sure certain ones go certain places. Also remember that there's one at the way front, and there's one underneath, actually 2 underneath the side button PCB. So now with all the screws out, you can kind of give it a push and separate the shell. I'm actually not going to do that because this is hot glued in there, and I'm just going to leave it. But you can trust me, this top shell will separate. Actually, I could do it on this one if I wanted to. Yeah, I'll do it on this one. Perfect. So here's the G400 shell. So you can see we have this pivot. So, oops, that's actually not on right. So the side buttons are actually going to be, oh, that's not on all the way. So the side buttons are going to be on this pivot here, that there's a little latch on it, so you'll have to be mindful of that, but it should kind of twist out of place, and then you're able to take the buttons out and maybe bend them back to shape if they're getting bent out of shape from using it a lot. So now that we have all the screws out, we can lift up that part. And also watch out for this black piece at the front here. I just like to pivot that out like that, and then we can remove this. And then mine's nice and clean because I just cleaned it, but you can blast this with some compressed air. Same thing goes with this. And then to put it back on, you want to do the gray piece first, just like that. And then the middle piece, I like to do the front of it first, and then I kind of pivot this downward. There we go. You want to make sure all the buttons line up again, and then you just screw everything back together. Okay, so now to put everything back together, it's just a reverse of everything you wanted to do. of what you originally did. So you'll see at the front here, I'll show you guys, this and this. Those 2 points are what contacts the micro switches on the PCB. If you're having problems with the switches feeling spongy, like there's no click, it just kind of presses up and down like it feels like a spring, that's probably a problem with the micro switch. My micro switch is dead. You need to replace it or take it apart and take a look inside. Alternatively, though, it can also be a problem with the contact points. So sometimes these contact points, these are just plastic, and the plastic rubbing on the other plastic over time can kind of wear one or the other out. So you might have to add in, sometimes you'll see people, they take just a tiny, tiny little dab of tape, and they'll put a piece of tape there, because as this gets worn down and loses material, you want to fill in that material with, like, electrical tape works fine. I have done that on, I have a Zowie EC1 Evo that I got that was not working, and I got it back into working order, and one of the things I had to do was put some tape on some of the buttons, because the guy who I don't know, whoever was the previous owner must have kind of nerd raged at it, because the thing was bent the shell was bent up pretty bad, even though mechanically everything inside of it was in perfect shape. Well, not perfect shape, but in good usable shape. Okay, so now those buttons are back on, and just, you want to do a double check. You'll want to press everything and make sure things are working before you completely put it back together. Okay. Now we'll go back to the bottom shell. So now the lens needs to go in, and I guess I have a 2-piece lens now, so I'll put that bottom half in, and then I actually should probably connect the USB cable back, because the USB cable sort of goes underneath the PCB here. So there's this L shape here, fits into an L-shaped groove. You'll see it. Okay, and then we'll also want to line up the hole in the top PCB with the hole for the scroll wheel. And then just making sure that that's all down. It should go down with relative ease. Mine's probably screwed up because my lens is broken in half. But there are some pegs that sit around the board that stuff should fit into nicely. Mine's not fitting into this nicely, so bear with me for a minute here. I feel like mine is caught on the upper half. So, there we go. That feels right. Okay. Now, we'll go ahead and do the silver screws in their locations. So there's probably going to be minor differences. If you have a different mouse, maybe screw location will be different, or something minor like that, but it really shouldn't have too much of an issue. This bracket, I just noticed there's actually an up arrow. If my camera focuses, there's an up arrow in the dead center of it. And you can't, oh, there you go. So that means point that towards the top of the mouse. Okay. Look at that. They make these things pretty idiot-proof. Also, as you could see, I put this cable, it goes on top of the orange PCB here, but it goes underneath the green one. So a bit of a sandwich going on there. Also, so I guess I probably shouldn't have said this at the very beginning of the video, but it is better that you don't have the mouse plugged in when you do any of this. Just because the potential for an issue, you're using a metal screwdriver and metal screws, and you don't want to put 2 pins together on the microprocessor or something and have something short out. Yeah, not to mention it's kind of annoying if like you're messing around with your mouse and you're clicking crap on your computer. So there's that. Oh, I forgot one screw here that goes into the top of the shell. I always forget this one. It goes right into the very tip top there. Okay. Alright, now for the scroll wheel. The scroll wheel, we slap this spring back onto the side with the legs. Slide it into the slot. Whoops. There we go. Make sure the legs are aligned. Okay. Everything seems sturdy. So now we'll reconnect the connector here. And it kind of goes in with a firm click. That cable's still good. Okay. And then the top of the mouse just goes on straight down. There we go. Okay. Now something I like to do is I'll just pinch it together and I'll just check everything. Okay. It feels like everything works. So now I'll go ahead and finish screwing this together. So overall, I think it's a fairly simple fix for a lot of mouse problems. I think a lot of people are just afraid of taking it apart, ruining the mouse feet. Honestly, something like with the mouse feet, that depends. Every mouse is a little bit different. Particularly the newer Logitech mice, their feet use this like double back foam adhesive, and it is absolutely terrible. It is really hard to get the feet off in one piece. But overall, it's something that, I mean, something you should do. If you really, really love a mouse and, you know, it starts failing on you after a while, you don't have to feel like, oh crap, now I have to upgrade to the newest thing, which I don't really want to. You know, you can breathe new life into your mouse if you just maintain it, you know, dust it out every now and then, replace the micro switches as they die, take good care of it. So with that, I guess, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this video was informative. It was really long, just like my Ikari video, but that's how these things go. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below in the comment section, and I'll respond as quickly as possible. So once again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next.